Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today we have a very special guest, Baer, ladies and gentlemen. So for those of us who are into marketing, Jay needs no introduction, but let me just quote one line. Jay shows you how to create marketing that's so good, customers tell their friends about it. So I guess that's what we're here for today, and that's the kind of marketing we should all be doing. So let's wait a few more seconds so that everyone can join us in the room. Yeah, and in the meantime, let me know if the sound quality is okay. So please type in the chat if you can hear me well. Okay. All right. Nice. Cool. Yeah, thanks so much, guys, for the feedback. Fantastic. Yeah. So where are you joining us from? All righty. Cool. So we have India, Canada, US. Yeah. All right. Cool. Great.
We got Kayla from
Great.
Indiana.
Awesome.
I'm also from Indiana, so that's great.
Yeah, fantastic. All righty. So it seems that everything is working pretty well. Fantastic. So before we start, let me go over a few housekeeping items. So my name is Ireg and I'm here today with my colleague Alex, and together we'll moderate the discussion and do our best to answer all your questions. The webinar will take approximately 50 minutes, and during the webinar, Jay will reveal the top 18 questions and answers every small business entrepreneur needs to know in 2019. If there is some time left after the presentation, we'll have a quick Q&A session. So just don't worry. We will do our best to answer all the questions. Of course, during the presentation, I will also moderate the discussion. Just if anything pops up during, Jay will be able to answer that. As usual, we're recording the webinar, and we'll send you an email with the recording in the next few days. So okay, without further ado, I'll pass the mic to Jay.
Eric, thanks so much. Fantastic to be with all of you. I am, in fact, Jay Baer. I'm president of a company called Convince and Convert. It's a consulting firm that works with brands on digital marketing, customer service, and customer experience issues. I'm the best-selling author of 6 books. My most recent book is called Talk Triggers. I'm a 7th-generation entrepreneur and small business owner, so myself and my family and my grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, my great-great-great-great-grandfather, everybody's been an entrepreneur and a small business owner for a long, long time. I'm a Hall of Fame keynote speaker. I've advised more than 700 brands since I got into this business a long time ago. I'm the co-host of the Social Pros podcast and host of the brand new Talk Triggers show. There's a weekly video on YouTube, also a podcast about word-of-mouth marketing case studies. A couple of quick notes before we jump into the content. Just to reiterate, yes, we are recording this. Yes, you'll get a copy afterwards, not only of the presentation and the video, but the slides also. And if you've got extra questions after the session, GetResponse, my friends at GetResponse will let you know this as well, but you can also always feel free to email me, jay@convinceandconvert.com. So we got 18 questions here, plus the ones that you might ask during the presentation or at the conclusion of today's session. We divided these questions, GetResponse and myself, into kind of sections for easier access and easier understanding. The first section is all about email questions. Incredibly important, of course, because email remains kind of the spine of digital marketing. The most common way to interact with your customers and your prospects is through email. But I think it's safe to say that email is not as easy as it once was. Most people don't sit around thinking, what I would like is to get more email. People don't typically say that. So to continue to be successful with email, we have to think about it perhaps a little bit differently. So the first question is, how do we get more email subscribers? How do we get more email subscribers? I think the first piece of advice I would have on this is to merchandise your email opportunity on your website and in your social media in a way that it can't be missed. You could or could not choose to use a pop-up or some kind of modal window to make sure that people know that you have an email subscription opportunity. That's probably a conversation for another day, and I can argue both sides of that question, whether or not you should or should not use a pop-up. But I think in general, what I find, especially for most small and medium-sized businesses, they really don't go out of their way to let potential customers or potential subscribers know that there is an email opportunity. And even if they do, even if they say, please subscribe to our email, get on our email list, whatever language you want to use there, they don't, in that subscription appeal, do a very good job of describing what it is you're subscribing to. I see this all the time, and if you're guilty of this, I apologize. I'm not speaking about anybody in particular, but I do see it quite often. You go on a website and it says, sign up for our email. Well, that's kind of a leap of faith, isn't it? I don't really know what it is that you're going to send me. I don't know how often you're going to send it. I don't really know what's going to be contained in that email. And it's not as if email is so attractive to people nowadays. Like, wait, you're going to send me an email? Wow, how fast can I sign up? So my advice is to describe in some amount of detail what this email subscription is. How often will you receive it? Why do you want it? And the best practice, and this is mathematically proven, by the way, is to provide a link to a sample or the most recent email. You have a website and it says get on our email list, and I would make it get on our weekly email list or whatever cadence you have envisioned so that people know how often they'll get it. And then have a second sentence which says, see a sample of an email that contains important information, promotional offers, whatever the circumstances are. And you actually have a link that people can then see a sample email, because then they know what they're getting into. This idea that just we have an email and we expect people to sign up for it, even though they have no idea what that means, is not going to work. People are much more circumspect about email subscriptions. They're much more particular about getting email on a regular basis. So make sure that you tell people what they're getting and why they should care. Make sense? Next question in today's presentation is, how often should we send email? And of course, there's lots of thinking around sending email daily or weekly or monthly or every 2 weeks or every third Thursday or whatever the circumstances are. But I think it's important to understand that there's really two types of email, right? There are emails that are based on your actual behavior, transactional emails, things like a shipping notification, or things like we need you to reset your password, or things that aren't necessarily trying to sell you anything. It's just a relationship status email. Those should, of course, be sent when it's necessary to send them. When the product ships, you send a shipping notification. But I think most of us are considering email cadence and frequency through the lens of how often should we send a promotional email. From a company standpoint, and thinking through how do you put email into your overall content marketing and communications process, it is obviously easier to say we are going to send an email every Friday, or we are going to send an email every other Friday, because then it's in your editorial calendar. We do the same thing at Convince and Convert. We send an email on Sundays that I actually write. It's called On, and it features sort of the top digital marketing stories and case studies and examples and reports over the past week or so. We send it every Sunday because we know that over the course of a 7-day period, there's going to be things that happen that are worth sending. And that's the key, because the real answer to this question is both very simple and very complicated. The real answer to this question is you should send email when, and only when, you have something valuable for your audience. I'll tell you a little story. I purchased some underwear from an online store. And I subsequently received an email from this online underwear company every day. A daily email giving me promotional offers for more underwear. Now, let me ask you a question. Your results may vary. I'm not really sure how you guys roll, but for me, as a man, my underwear purchasing frequency is definitely not daily. Like I got a friend who owns a store. I said, "Hey, how on average, how much do people buy underwear?" I said, "Guys, like every couple of years, maybe, right?" So to say I bought underwear, therefore you want to opt me into a daily email about getting more underwear. I I stayed subscribed to it for about 2 months just to kind of see what would happen. It became more of an experiment, more of a fascination. I thought, well, how many emails are they going to send me? And the answer was infinite number of emails. And so I of course unsubscribed because I only need so much underwear information. And that's, I think, an important point here. You send stuff when you have something interesting or worthwhile to send, because you have to remember your email doesn't happen in a vacuum. Your email is competing against, at least for attention, every other email that this person receives on a given day, plus all the other messages that they receive via social media or any other communications modality. So in general, I will tell you this. In general, sending fewer emails produces better results than sending more emails. Now, that's not always true, but in general, I find it to be true. Gene and I are aligned. Gene just mentioned in the chat that experienced the exact same thing with underwear. I'm glad that I'm not alone, that this daily underwear email phenomenon is not just unique to myself. Thank you, Gene. Third question. What's the best way to improve email results? We probably almost all know this if you've been sending email for any amount of time, but the open rate, the percentage of people who get an email who open it, and the click-through rate, the percentage of people who receive an email who click a link to go back to a website, both of those have gone down fairly steadily over the years for a couple of reasons. One, there's a lot more email being sent. Two, there's a lot more aggressive email filtering going on inside the inbox, whether it's Gmail or any other tool tends to mark emails accordingly and not show you as many as they used to. And frankly, and this is a little bit of a puzzle to me, I think most companies are getting worse at email as opposed to better, because they're violating the previous rule of only sending something when you have something worthwhile to send. They're just like, well, it's Thursday, so let's send something out there because it's Thursday and we don't really care whether it's useful or not, but it's time to send. So these results have been going down over time. Open rates have gone from, at one point 40%, and now it's down in the teens. In many cases, click-through rates have gone from 5% down to 0.5% on average in a lot of cases. The best way to improve email results, especially today, is to test it. My philosophy is every time you send an email, other than a transactional email, but anytime you send an email to more than one person, you should be running some kind of a test. You should be testing the subject line. You should be testing the from line. You should be testing the time of day that you send. You should be testing the day of the week that you send. In almost all email platforms, running these kind of tests is quite simple these days. All you got to do, come up with 2 subject lines, split your list in half, list A, list B. You send half the emails to A, half the emails to B, and you see which of those subject lines works better. And then the next week, now you've got additional information about what works. And I'll tell you this, I've been in digital marketing since 1993. I was in digital marketing before there was a browser, and this is true. I was in digital marketing before, probably, let's say, 10 years before Google existed. I've been in digital marketing so long, and this is 100% true, that when I started in this business, domain names were free. You could get whatever domain name you wanted and pay nothing for it, because who would want a website? I've been in this business so long that my partners and I sold the website Budweiser.com to the Anheuser-Busch Brewing Company, the largest brewery in America. We sold that domain name for 50 cases of beer. That's how long I've been doing this. And the one thing that's been true from the first day, and is still true today, is that digital is the easiest thing to test. Before I got involved in digital, I was a direct mail specialist. I wrote lots and lots of direct mail. And direct mail testing is also really important, but really hard. It's time intensive, it's expensive, you don't get your results back for a long time. Testing of email in particular is so simple that there's really no reason you shouldn't do it. Anchor asks, can I send a health-related newsletter every alternate day, so every other day? Well, I think if every other day there is value there for your subscribers, absolutely. But your subscribers will tell you that, right? Look at your stats, right? If your open rate is low and stays low, if your click-through rate is low and stays low, well, then maybe that's too often. One of the things you might think about, Anchor, is to all right, if we're going to send it every other day, what if we sent it once a week, right? And do an A/B test then. Take half your audience, send them an email every other day, as you currently are. Take the other half of your audience and only send them one email a week that has maybe a little bit more information in it, and then check your results. That's the thing about email. You don't ever have to guess what's going to work. Just test it, and then you'll know what works. Right. Great note in the chat from Eric that's got some fantastic benchmarking data on email results and stats from our friends at GetResponse. Thanks so much. Okay, next category is content marketing questions. Content marketing questions. First question. What's the biggest mistake that companies are making with content? This is an easy one. It is creating random acts of content. Random acts of content. I see it all the time. I see it with our clients. I see it with friends. I see it everywhere. People are just making content, off the cuff and say, okay, well, today let's do an article, and tomorrow we're going to do a video, and the next day we're going to do like an ebook or a white paper. And then we're going to do another podcast. It's just sort of a hodgepodge, just sort of a random collection of content. There's no topical consistency. There's no format consistency. There's no publishing cadence consistency. What we tell all of our clients at Convince and Convert is that every business now has to think like a television network. So if you run a TV network, you have shows, and those shows are consistent all the time. Think about a popular show, at least here in the U.S., like The Walking Dead, right? Perhaps the most famous zombie show ever. I can probably say that's true. Walking Dead is always on at the same time. Walking Dead always has the same actors. Walking Dead always reaches and is targeted toward the same audience. It is a show. Customers, in their case viewers, know when it's going to be on. They know what it's about, and then they can tune in accordingly, or remember to tune in, or save space on their DVR, etc. And today, content marketing really is the same idea, that you want to create 3 different types of shows. This is how we advise it in our company, 3 types of shows. The first type of show is binge-worthy content, which is what The Walking Dead is, right? People will binge Walking Dead and watch 11 episodes in a row. You want to have at least one show in your business that is binge-worthy, that happens very consistently, and is set up in a way that if people want to watch more than one episode or more than one circumstance, they can do that at their leisure. So, for example, this webinar will eventually be on the GetResponse site, and people could watch this webinar, then watch another one, then watch another one. I have 2 podcasts, as I mentioned in the introduction. The Social Pros podcast, which is about social media, and then the Talk Trigger show, which is about word of mouth. You can watch one episode of the Talk Trigger show. Each episode's only 6 minutes long, and then watch 6, 8, 10, 14 episodes in a row after that. So you want to have at least one binge-worthy show. I see in the chat there, Will and Cosmin are talking about my friend Gary Vaynerchuk. Yeah, Gary actually has several binge-worthy shows. He has the Gary V show, and he has several other kind of things that he's doing. But if you notice, other than what he does in social, Gary really adheres to this show format. Second type of show you want to have are kind of one-time shows, special shows. And these are bigger content pieces that you might execute once a month, twice a quarter, something like that. And it would be something like a webinar or an ebook or some sort of longer format content execution. That's your one-time shows. And then the third type of show you need are kind of your regularly scheduled shows. So this isn't your blockbuster hits like The Walking Dead is. It's other shows on AMC, the channel that produces Walking Dead, other shows that are always on the schedule. Right? It's always Tuesdays at 7 or Fridays at 6 or whatever the circumstances are. And it's fine, but it's not, it's not the one that gets all the attention. So you think about a blog, right? You're going to write some blog posts and you're going to maybe do a couple a week or whatever your cadence is. That would be a regularly scheduled show. Does that make sense? So that's how we think about it. Binge-worthy shows, got to have at least one. One-time shows, you do one or two a quarter, probably something like that. And then your regularly scheduled shows, which might be a couple times a week, depending on what that format is. Okay. Next question. What's the best way to generate leads with content? Best way to generate leads with content is to make your target audience smaller. If you want your audience to respond to your content, it's important that it is incredibly relevant to them, because there is no shortage of content out there, the same way there's no shortage of email. And to break through, to get attention, to create behavior, to generate leads, that content has to be very specific and relevant to that individual or to that company. I hear this all the time. You probably do too. Your audience may say, or you may think, they're just too busy. This audience they're too busy to watch the video. They're too busy to listen to the podcast. They're too busy to attend the webinar. They're too busy to read the blog. None of that's true. It's absolutely not true. It's not about being too busy at all. What's really going on there, if you create content that doesn't succeed and doesn't generate leads, is that the content you're making isn't relevant enough to your audience, usually because you're targeting too broad of an audience. I know this to be true because if you give a target audience the content that they need in the format they prefer at the time they want it, they will watch it. They'll listen to it. They'll download it. They'll show up. All the things that you want to have happen will happen. Today, relevancy is the killer app. And there's so much content being created that having a narrower, more specific target audience will actually work better, especially when you're trying to generate leads, than a broader, larger audience. Next question. What if you're just starting out? So if you're just really getting into doing a lot of content, like what would you start first? I've had this question a lot of times. Would you start with a blog, a podcast, a video series, a puppet show? Like what would it be? And I'll tell you, 100%, I will tell you that video would be the best way to go. For a couple of reasons. One, a larger and larger percentage of content overall is video. People, individuals, consumers, potential customers are spending more and more time with video. Video has been shown to be more persuasive than text in a lot of different studies and reports. But more importantly, I think just from a efficiency of content creation standpoint, video is the way to go. Because if you have video, you also have audio. And if you have video, you also have text. I'll go back to my Talk Triggers show. Talk Triggers show, I record it in my studio, and it's originally a video. It's a 6-minute video. That's the base of the show. But then we strip out the audio file, change the editing a little bit, and now it's a podcast. Then we transcribe that audio, clean it up a little bit, and now it becomes an article. If you do it the other way around, if you start with an article, turning it into a podcast and then turning it into a video is, of course, possible. but much more complicated and much more resource intensive. So now I always advise people to start with video and then go downstream from there instead of trying to go upstream from text. Much more efficient that way. Next category is social media questions. Social media questions. First one is, oops, that's not the first one. Messed up. Hold on, sorry. There we go. Does organic social media still work? Well, kinda, I guess is the answer here. There are certainly circumstances where companies are succeeding with organic social media. They are producing content in social channels, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Snapchat, Pinterest, that reach an audience. But that is the exception, not the rule today. Most companies, especially bigger companies, it's a little bit easier for smaller companies, but most companies have kind of at best modest success with organic social media today. And there's a number of reasons for that. One, there's so much social media being created that it's hard to break through the same way it is with email. But also, and this is important, the social media companies, social media sites, all of them, except for Pinterest, which is filed for their IPO. Everybody else in that game, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, of course, which is part of Facebook, Snapchat, every single one of them are publicly traded corporations, which means that they have a legal fiduciary responsibility to maximize profits for their shareholders. They have no responsibility whatsoever to maximize profits for your business. As a result, and many of you have probably experienced this firsthand, they have changed the way social media content is distributed and displayed such that it is exceedingly difficult for businesses to create social media content and get that content shown to a large number of people unless you pay them. Social media advertising works fantastically well in many cases. Organic, free social media doesn't work quite as well as it used to. Doesn't mean it can't, just means that it's harder than it ever has been. And one of the ways to fight against that is to use the previous content idea about shows, to create consistent social media shows, whether it's live video or interview with a customer every Friday, to not do random acts of social either, but to turn your social media approach into a place that you also feature shows. Next question. What's the most important trend on Facebook? Boy, this is a doozy. You may have heard that just a couple weeks ago, Facebook made a big announcement that they are going to move toward privacy and kind of change what they emphasize and what they focus on. Now, to me, this isn't really about privacy at all. It's about control. But the sum of all this is that Facebook is going to de-emphasize the public news feed, both on Facebook itself and on Instagram. They are going to instead emphasize two things. A, stories. Expiring content via Instagram stories and Facebook stories is probably the number one thing to focus on in this year, in my estimation. And Snapchat stories, if that's your audience. But the other thing that Facebook is focused on is, over the long term, probably even more important, which is they're combining WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, and Instagram direct messages into one messaging behemoth. And frankly, what they're trying to do is turn the focus of social media away from broadcasting, where a business puts a message out there and some people see it, toward narrowcasting, messaging based, where a brand or a business would send a message on this new app and a few dozen people would see it, or only a handful, or only one or two. It's away from broadcasting and toward the phone book model of communication, where you only interact with people that you actually know. What does this mean? It means that what Facebook is actually trying to do, in my estimation, is they are trying to become the new email. They are trying to be the company that is in charge of all messaging. And you think about that, that is a pretty big assignment. That's where they're headed. It has huge ramifications for us all. We'll see how it shakes out. I wrote a long blog post about exactly what all this means. I'll make sure that Eric gets it, and maybe we can send it out to you in the follow-up notes after this session, because I think it merits spending a few minutes with it and thinking through how this is going to affect your business. Next question about social media. How can we succeed at social media customer service? I wrote a book called Hug Your Haters a couple of years ago, which is all about social media customer service, so I know this topic well. It is very, very important. More and more customers are interacting with businesses in social instead of email or certainly phone or fax or any other circumstance. And there's a couple of things that we learned in the research for that book that I want to make sure you understand. First is that responding to customers is the most important thing you can do. And the data bears this out. First, let me just say, I'm not going to make you put this in the chat because I know the answer would be yes for 95% of you. My question would be, have you ever complained to a company and heard nothing back? Social media or otherwise, and the answer is almost universally yes. But that never makes you feel better about that company. It always makes you feel worse, because no response is a response, right? I mean, no response is a response that says we care so little about your dissatisfaction that we refuse to even acknowledge it. We're just going to ignore you entirely, and that's not particularly good for customer retention. Turns out, when you do the research on this, if a customer complains in social media, although this is all true for email or phone or anything else, but if a customer complains and they hear nothing back from you, it decreases their advocacy, the likelihood that they will tell somebody about you, tell nice things about you. It decreases advocacy by 50%. However, if you answer, even if you don't have good news, even if you're like, yep, that's true, sorry, even if you don't have good news, it increases advocacy by 25%. So in a very real way, not answering hurts your business, and answering helps your business. So the first piece of advice here is to answer everybody, everywhere. Now, will that require some resources, perhaps more resources than you've devoted to customer service in the past? Yeah, probably. But it's probably the best money you can spend. Keeping your current customers is a very wise investment in comparison to spending a bunch of money to get new customers. So I would absolutely recommend you answering everybody. And the second piece of this story is to answer quickly. Speed has a tremendous impact on how customers perceive interactions with businesses. About half of all customers expect a response in social within an hour. Half of all customers expect a response in social within an hour. Very few companies are set up today to respond within an hour consistently. Now, some do, but most don't. And that is flying in the face of what customers expect you to be able to do. Could you respond to customers in an hour? Absolutely. Every single person right now listening could respond to customers within an hour. You just choose not to. You choose to spend your resources elsewhere. You probably choose those resources on trying to get new customers. And I will tell you that you'll be better off as a business taking some of those resources and putting them into keeping your current customers happy. So, succeeding at social media customer service, responding to everybody, responding quickly. Third story here is just a quick note, understanding that every channel where you exist is a customer service channel, whether you want it to be or not. Where we see this most commonly now is on Instagram, right? When Instagram came out and started being used by businesses, nobody would think about asking a question in Instagram or complaining to a business on Instagram. Now it happens all the time, both publicly and in direct messages. So if you have an account in social, that account is a customer service channel. Maybe not all the time, but some of the time. So you have to be prepared to provide customer service wherever you actually exist out there in social. Fourth set of questions are digital marketing questions. First one here is, what's the best way to increase conversion rates in digital? And it's sort of a combination of what I said earlier about email and content. First, make sure you're testing landing pages, emails, ads, anything else. First is testing. And the second is relevancy, making sure that the information that you're providing is as relevant as possible to your target audience. And in fact, speaking of Gary Vaynerchuk, he said something a few months ago that was really interesting. This idea of, if you're going to do paid social advertising on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, then instead of having one or two good ads, you ought to have 100 ads or 1,000 ads, that you ought to be making a special ad for the smallest possible customer segment, right? Customers who are left-handed, who live in Romania, who drive this kind of car, like really, really, really small segments, because then you can build an ad that is really, really relevant for that particular audience. And as you all probably know, Google, Facebook, Twitter, all the sites out there use relevancy score to determine how often your ad is seen. Even though you're paying for the ad, they're only going to show it to a certain number of people based on how relevant the ad is to the landing page and how well the ad actually succeeds in terms of getting interaction from the audience. So testing, relevancy. That's the best way to increase conversion rates. Second thing, is influencer marketing real or is it overhyped? Both is my answer. It is both real and overhyped. Certainly, influencer marketing is here to stay, I believe, and it's because the more traditional forms of customer acquisition are becoming less reliable and more expensive. Television, radio, print, outdoor, search ads, social ads, content, all the things that we have tried, email, over the years are getting more difficult and more expensive, almost universally so. And so this idea that we can use influencers to spread information about our companies is very attractive. It's the new thing, and the new thing is always attractive. It also feels like a really good bet because you don't have to pay as much, and there's not hardly any cost associated with the creative and sort of the ad creation side. So I get it. I understand why everybody wants to use influencer marketing, both B2C and B2B. But it's also overhyped because it's not as if it's magic or somehow immune to the laws of communication and marketing. What I see most companies doing, small and large, is selecting influencers that may not actually have influence. Here's what I mean by that. Influence means that you have the ability to change behavior. You have the ability to change the behavior of some group of people. Influence is not the same as audience. Audience means that you reach a lot of people. It doesn't mean that you can change their behavior. So what I find is a lot of companies trying to work with influencers that have a large audience, but aren't necessarily influential about the things that you actually sell. In general, unless you're a pretty large brand, in general, the same way I talked about, focusing on smaller audiences with your content, the same thing is true with influencers. You're much better off, in most cases, again, this is a generalization, you're much better off working with influencers who have a smaller audience, but a narrower topical authority. You're better off if you're selling, somebody said in here, backpacks. If you're selling backpacks, then what you would want to find is somebody who has a very tight, very specific, very relevant blog about backpack reviews, or somebody who has a YouTube channel that reviews backpacks. That's a better influencer, even if the audience isn't huge, than somebody who is kind of actually famous, who kind of sort of talks about backpacks. Maybe somebody who's a famous outdoorsman of some kind. Narrower audiences typically have more actual influence associated because this is their most relevant person. This is the priest of their church, right? Is this person who's the backpack genius. Make sense? So I say it's overhyped because I feel like a lot of companies are thinking about it wrong. They're thinking about influencer marketing as a way to be broad, and instead you ought to be thinking about influencer marketing as a way to be narrow. Next question in digital. How do I convince my boss to increase digital budgets? There's no one answer here. It depends on your boss and how she or he thinks about justifications and budgets. The first thing you got to do is determine what your boss really cares about. Do they care about reach, meaning how many people did we interact with? Do they care about behavior? How many people clicked, came to the website? Do they care about leads? Do they care about sales? Everybody, of course, cares about sales, but usually it's sort of an elliptical path between what you're doing in digital and actual sales. Your results may vary. The first thing you have to do is understand what they care about, and then make sure to track all of those things. Like, the great thing about digital is that it's inherently trackable, much more so than TV or outdoor, or buying golf balls with your logo on it or whatever. But you have to make sure that you're putting things into practice to actually track it. You got to make sure to use tracking URLs, short form URLs like Bitly. You got to make sure to use tools like GetResponse. You have to make sure to be good at Google Analytics or whatever analytics platform that you have chosen. This sounds crazy simple, but it's not. If you want to be better at tracking, therefore being better at convincing your boss, you have to do things that are trackable. And this happens to me all the time. We get a new client and they say, okay, we've got to justify the money that we're spending in social media to our chief marketing officer, and my team and I say, great. So have you tracked all the results of that in the past? No, we don't really use tracking URLs or anything like that. Well, there's only so much we can do if we don't actually have the math. So find out what your boss cares about, and then make sure you're putting tracking in place that demonstrates what you're actually doing in the category of things that she or he values. I will also tell you, and I've mentioned a couple times, this notion of testing in digital and how important it is to boost your results. Very true. I will also say that in my experience, bosses love testing, because it demonstrates you're not just making it up. It demonstrates that you're not just guessing, and it shows that you're being a good steward of resources. You're saying, all right, we're going to try and be more efficient. We're going to try and optimize over time. We're going to try and increase our success rate, which shows a level of care about the budget that most bosses respond to. All right, next category. Word of mouth questions. As I mentioned earlier, my new book is called Talk Triggers. It's all about word of mouth and a system for using word of mouth effectively to grow your business. So I got a couple questions in this category as well. First one is, which is more important, online or offline word of mouth? Well, the answer is, mathematically, they are equally important. The research shows that 50% of word of mouth happens online, social media, review sites, discussion boards and forums, etc. 50%. The other 50% happens offline. So you see somebody and you mention something, or you're on the phone or whatever, and you're making a recommendation, or hey, did you hear about this? 50-50. I will tell you though, the data also shows that offline word of mouth. So Eric and I are together, and I say, hey, have you heard about GetResponse? And he says, yeah, I work there, and etc. Offline word of mouth is more impactful. It's equally common as online, but offline is more impactful because there is additional intimacy when you're talking to someone one-on-one or even in a small group, as opposed to posting something in social or somewhere else on the web. Also, offline word of mouth is a little bit more impactful because there can be it's easier to ask follow-up questions. Right? So, you should GetResponse. Oh yeah, tell me more about GetResponse. What were the features? How come you like it? It's harder to do that in a digital environment, especially ratings and review sites. So it's equally common, but offline has more impact. Why don't companies have a word of mouth strategy the same way they have a social media strategy? And this is very true. Let me just tell you some of the data here. About 50% of all purchases are influenced by word of mouth. And in B2B, it's 91%. 91% of all B2B purchases are influenced by word of mouth. So it's pretty important. But what's strange is companies don't have a word of mouth strategy. They just take it for granted. They just assume that customers will talk about them. But that's not really the way the world works. You have to give people something to talk about. And I think at some level, a lot of companies believe that social media is word of mouth and word of mouth is social media, that it's the same thing. And that's not true. It's not true any more so than a tube of toothpaste is the same as toothpaste. They're certainly related. The tube holds the toothpaste, but the tube and the toothpaste are not the same thing. They are different things. This works the same. Social media is the tube. Word of mouth is the toothpaste. Social media is one of the many ways that word of mouth can be conveyed. But word of mouth is the actual toothpaste. That's the story that people tell about your business. And that story can be told in social. That story can be told face-to-face. That story can be told in a number of different ways. So what we want to think about is, what is the story? What do people share about your business? What is noteworthy? What is talkable? What is a conversation worth having? The problem is that most companies don't know that. Or the more common error is they believe that competency creates conversation. That if you just run a good business, a competent organization, that customers will notice that and talk about that. But that's not how customers actually behave. I don't know everybody on today's broadcast. I probably know some of you, but I know this for sure. None of you has ever said, nobody's ever said, hey, let me tell you about this perfectly adequate experience I just had. Why don't we say that? Because it's not a story worth telling. It's not interesting or noteworthy. So what you want to do is come up with, we call it a talk trigger, come up with something different that you do in the operations of your organization, in your customer experience, something different that customers notice and talk about. That becomes the story that they tell about you. How do we get customers talking about our business? That's just it. You have to find something that you can do that customers don't expect. And because they don't expect it, they notice it. And because they notice it, they tell their friends about it. And when they tell their friends about it, some portion of those friends become your customers. What word of mouth really does is it turns your customers into volunteer marketers. Yeah, Shoma, exactly. Purple Cows. Yes. A talk trigger is similar to Seth Godin's Purple Cows, a little bit different in how it's strategized and delivered. But yes, absolutely on the same wavelength. So you've got to come up with something consistently that customers see and they notice and they share, and that becomes the growth propellant for your business. Works for every kind of business, every size of business. Actually, in the book, talktriggers.com is a website for it. We actually have a 6-step process for exactly how to create a word of mouth strategy that will get you new customers. Last section here, overall advice. Why are digital marketers and small business owners so stressed out? Because the rules of marketing continue to change, and the ways that we can market continue to grow. It's so much more difficult now to get customers than it ever has been. In the past, there were only so many options, right? That's why it's a direct mail specialist, right? Direct mail is a good option. TV is an option. Radio is an option. Newspaper is an option. That was it. That was like the list, right? Now, just in digital, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of things that you can do. A number of my friends are small business owners, kind of on the B2C side, restaurateurs or accountants or attorneys, etc. And they tell me all the time, like, how sick they are of getting calls from all these different websites and providers and Yelp and all this other stuff, and give us money. Like, everybody wants some money to do something. They're just like, I can't, I'm trying to be an accountant, man. I can't figure out like all these different things. that we might do in marketing. So it's a real challenge, and I think that's why everybody's so stressed out. Is that there's not one answer, and there's more options than ever. And there's a thing out there, philosophy, longstanding consumer psychology principle called Hick's law, and Hick's law says that the more options that you have, the harder it is to make a choice. Sometimes this is called, there's a great book by this name too, sometimes this is called the paradox of choice. We want more and more choices, but then when we get more and more choices, it becomes harder to make a decision because we have so many choices. And this is what's happening in marketing today. There's so many ways to do it that it becomes overwhelming, and it stresses you out because you're thinking, am I doing it wrong? Am I doing it right? Am I missing it? Have I not turned over all the rocks I should turn over? That's why people get all stressed out. How do you spend 26 plus years in digital, as I have? Well, here's how I keep doing this. One, even though it is frustrating that there are so many options and so many ways to do it, I sort of take solace in the fact that every day is different, and every month is different, and every quarter is different, every year is different, and that you're never done. Now that is, kind of feels like a treadmill in some ways, but you're never done. And I think that's pretty cool. I think that's kind of intellectually satisfying. What we always tell our clients, because it's 100% true, that if you have a strategy for content, email, social, word of mouth, anything, if you have a strategy that you created probably longer ago than fourth quarter of 2017, you might as well not have a strategy, because everything has changed so much that strategy is pointless. That strategy is wrong. And there's not a lot of businesses where that's true, where the pace of change is so constant and so continuous that you can reinvent kind of best practices on an almost continuous basis. So I like that part. And then the other thing is that I've got an amazing team at Convince and Convert of strategists, and so they're always researching and finding new ideas and new concepts, and so that means that I don't have to do all of that myself, which certainly helps. Last question. What's the most important thing to remember about digital? I have a sign in my office. I'm looking at it right now. My mom gave it to me years ago. I don't know, probably 15 years ago. The sign says, remember always, some days you're the pigeon, and some days you're the statue. And I think that's the most important thing to remember about digital. Even if you are amazing at this, you're going to fail. Digital marketing is a process of learning from your failures and not making the same mistake repeatedly, but making a ton of mistakes. Because anybody who tells you that they have the exact right answer either definitely does not know the answer, or B, is lying. Sometimes both. What I always tell clients, and feel free to steal this if you like, is I don't know the answer, but I know how to find out. And that finding out over time using tools like GetResponse is the secret to all of this. There is no magic. There is no system. That's why when I see people preaching, I've got the exact right answer, it frustrates me because they don't. They might have the answer for themselves, but it doesn't have the answer for you. So when you're not scared to fail, when you understand that failure is actually the first step in success, I think it makes digital marketing a lot more interesting and a lot less frustrating. That is the questions that we have assembled for you. We may have some other ones. This is a good time to jump in there. If you have some other ones, Eric will pop them up for me. Let me know what you think. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, great, Jay. Thank you so much for the presentation. It's packed with so much useful information. So yeah, guys, we have a couple of minutes left, so we can move on to the Q&A part. If you have any questions to Jay, please just type them in, and we'll answer. JJ will be able to answer. So yeah.
Thanks. And if not, as I mentioned, you can always send me an email, Jay at, I'm going to put it in here, jay@convinceconvert.com if you think of some later, and I'll answer as many as I can. Oh, and I actually want to tell you, I would love for you, I'm going to put it in right here, to check out the new show that I mentioned. I think it's really fun. See what you think. There's the URL for that. David asks, what do you think about prospecting with warm calls and then following up with email? Absolutely. Yeah. I think the key on that sequence, right? Warm calls and email, is making sure that the email adds value other than just reiterating the fact that you had a call. I see that a lot in sales. Like people say, you get the call, then the email's like, "Thanks for having the call." I'm like, "Dude, I didn't need that. I didn't need you to remind me of the thing that just happened." And that, I don't have that bad of a short-term memory. So I think it's got to be, here's the call, and then the email adds real value. Here's an ebook that I forgot to mention on the call that I think would really be interesting because it's exactly what you're seeking, right? So when you can kind of string together a nurture sequence that really adds value that did not happen already in the call, I think that's a great way to go. Karen asks, what are the digital channels you're watching that may soon rival the audience participation in Facebook, Twitter, Instagram? None. Well, I shouldn't say that. Instagram is the only social media channel that's growing in the US. Only one. Facebook down, Twitter flat, Pinterest flat, LinkedIn flat, Snapchat flat. Only one that's growing is Instagram. So from that perspective, Instagram would be the one I'm looking at. I would say that in the US, the one that I think will actually grow a lot in the next 12 to 18 months is WhatsApp. WhatsApp today is much more popular outside the US than in the US. I think that's going to change. Facebook is putting a lot of resources behind WhatsApp, as I mentioned earlier. So if you're thinking about, hey, what social channel, if you're in the US, if you're thinking about what social channel should we spend more time on and be more thoughtful about, I would say WhatsApp. Rick asks, please explain your view of podcasting as a tactic. I mean, I've been podcasting for 10 years, nine and a half years. So my team produces 4 or 5 different shows. We've been on the podcasting train for a long time. Rick, the one thing about podcasts is that it is the most intimate and the most persuasive form of content marketing. There's lots of things that you could do, but there is no competition for spending 20 to 45 minutes a week talking into somebody's head. It just has so much value from that perspective. It'd be like doing a webinar with the same audience every Friday, right? So that is really hard to replicate in other channels. The problem, Rick, is that most podcasts, and I mentioned this earlier about content in general, but it's probably more egregiously true for podcasts, most are too broad. Like the only way you're really going to succeed with a podcast today, to really break through, is to be somebody's favorite podcast in the world. And the only way you can be somebody's favorite is to be narrow enough to be the most relevant to them. So most podcasts say, well, we got to find a big audience, so let's be pretty broad so a lot of people might listen to us. It's the wrong way to think about it. What you want to be is specific enough that for that group, that particular narrower audience, you are the ultimate podcast for them. And then if you want to expand the audience later, fine, but you want to start being the ultimate podcast for some group, then expand it. That's the best way to do it. The other thing that happens today is that people don't promote their podcasts very well, right? They just kind of have an episode and maybe email some folks and hope for the best. You got to break through, right? So you got to use social and other shows to drive podcast downloads, which is harder to do than the last sentence would indicate. All right, I'm gonna get out of here. Thank you very much for the time. Anything else we got to do before we wrap it up?
Okay, cool. Yeah, looks like we're running out of time. So, thank you, Jay, for sharing great insights with us today. And thank you guys for joining us and being such an active group. As promised, we're going to send you a link to watch and download this presentation. So, thanks again. And we're looking forward to seeing you at the next webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
See ya. Yeah.